Jim, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us as a CEO of a public company that's had a very strong CVC program. And Dina, thank you very much for all of the support that you've been providing to GCV. It is my pleasure to turn the stage over to Justin Watkins, a Fakery Drinker, and Bob Wetzel of Enterprise Holdings. Bob and I had this great call with Janice Mawson of the Leadership Society in the crux of the pandemic, and we said, well, you're a rental car company. How are you guys doing right now? And he said, you know, our CVC program is so strong, we're just trucking along, no pun intended. So that being said, we're gonna welcome Bob and Justin to the stage to get into how Enterprise Holdings actually helped keep afloat, I think, right? And Enterprise Rental Car. So thank you, come on.
Good? All right.
I am. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Nice crowd. Great to be back together again in person. It's fantastic. Welcome, Bob. So, as Christina said, I'm Justin Watkins. I'm a partner at Fakery Drinker, and I co-lead our venture capital practice. And we have the pleasure this morning of hearing from Bob Wetzel of Enterprise. Bob, you're probably better at introducing yourself than I am, so you want to give the folks a little bit of your background?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Justin, and thank you to GCVI. We've been a very long supporter. Appreciate that. I've had a very eclectic career that's brought me to where I am today. After business school, I went to Wall Street, where I was a leveraged buyout banker. And then in the 1990 financial meltdown with all the LBOs, I transitioned to the life science industry, where I was an executive in the US, Europe, and Asia, where I was managing director in Asia. That was a fantastic career that helped me understand operations and opening up new markets. Then I transitioned very quickly to a management consulting role, which then led to a corporate development role. And then I was approached by some venture capitalists to co-found a biotechnology company. And that was a great learning experience where I raised 2 rounds of capital, merged it with another company, and then we sold that company. And with that background and experience, kind of the mix between entrepreneurship and M&A and venture capital, I started my own boutique advisory company. And I first supported emerging technology companies to help them in-license, out-license, raise money, sell themselves, and then I transitioned to also working on the other side of the table with venture capitalists to help them with corporate development and to sit on some boards. With that, I then co-founded a financial VC fund in St. Louis, which is where Enterprise is headquartered. And we had a great first fund. My partner was much older than me, so after our first fund, it was time for a transition. And 2 of the senior executives at Enterprise were our limited partners, and they asked me to start the corporate development group.
And the rest is history.
The rest is history.
Very, very good. All right. Well, so as Christina mentioned, we're going to talk about, I think in particular, about intent-driven success, particularly during the sort of the rough spot of this pandemic. But let's start, I guess, at the beginning. Can you talk a little bit, give us some background on Enterprise Holdings Ventures, a little bit of the history, maybe the investment strategy?
Sure. I think it might be helpful to set the table first on who Enterprise Holdings is, because not everybody immediately thinks of Enterprise Holdings as a rental car company. Our 3 brand names are Enterprise, National, and Alamo. We are the world's largest car rental company. We operate in over 100 countries around the world. We are privately held by the Taylor family. 3rd generation Taylor, Chris E. Taylor, is our CEO. And we have corporate-owned locations in the US, Canada, England, Ireland, France, Germany, and Spain. We own about 10% of Brazil's second largest car rental company, and about a third of China's car rental company. In addition to traditional car rental services, we are very large in truck rental. We have North America's second largest fleet management, fleet leasing company called Enterprise Fleet Management, where we have 550,000 vehicles in our fleet that we lease to our customers, and we service and manage not only those vehicles, but own vehicles of our customers, about 150,000 of those. We operate in over 100 countries around the world. And in the US, a fun little fact is that of our about 6,000 branches, we're within 15 minutes of about 90% of the US population.
Yeah. And I can say, living in the middle of rural Pennsylvania, the only rental car company in about a 40-mile radius is Enterprise. So, well, okay. So let's talk a little bit about the CVC activity, investment strategy, approach. Maybe a little bit about how CVC has changed over the years at Enterprise.
So I was brought in 2014 to start the corporate development group. They asked me to come in and lead our M&A. And with my background, I had said to the company, I'd be happy to do that, but I think we should also start a corporate venture capital unit. And the company and the family was very open-minded. They said, great, come on board. Let's spend 9 months to work on that, and we can develop approach together. So we did that. As with most corporates, I'm sure you're familiar with this. In your senior leadership, there's probably, at least in our case, about 50% of our senior leadership that were very familiar with venture capital. They may be LPs and VC funds or private equity funds. And the other half, they don't even know how to spell venture capital. So we spent a lot of time educating them on, first of all, what is venture capital? Secondly, what are the benefits that venture capital can bring to the company? Back then, Uber and Lyft had been started. The autonomous vehicle was touted to be ubiquitous around the world in 2020. Ground mobility was changing quite rapidly. And as the world's largest ground mobility company with over 1.85 million vehicles in our fleet, we needed to innovate. So there was great receptivity, and we've taken a hybrid approach to our corporate venture capital program. At the beginning, we wanted to make sure that we developed close relationships with sector-specific financial venture capitalists that are on their third-plus fund, that have deep relationships and great expertise in their sectors. We're an LP in 3 funds right now: a mobility fund, a travel technology fund, and an electrification fund. And so we've partnered with them to also come into the company to interface with our leadership and our senior middle management to help explain. We usually do this at least on an annual basis to help share, okay, what's happening in mobility, what's happening in electrification, what's happening in travel technology. Our view is that corporate venture capital is not only an innovation engine, but it's an education engine for the company. Having said that, we've put about $235 million to work in investing in direct companies. We've invested in 9 companies to date. Our typical check size is between $2 and $10 million. We're agnostic as to what rounds that we invest in between seed stage and typically Series D. We like to act like a financial VC, especially with me coming from a financial VC background. Back then, and still in some cases today, some financial VCs don't want to co-invest with corporates. And GCVI, Mach 49, and others have done a great job, many of us in the room, to help change the stigma of corporate venture capital to not ask for warrants, to not ask for a right of first offer, a right of first refusal. And we wanted to ensure with our senior leadership that when we want to submit a term sheet, when we want to participate in a financing, that we really need an answer within 48 hours. So we move very quickly. We have an investment committee comprised of the top 7 people of the company. We have quarterly standing meetings with our investment committee, of which at least 50% of the 2-hour meeting is educating leadership on what's happening in one of our strategic focus areas. When we started our corporate venture capital group, our strategic focus areas were fleet management and logistics, autonomous vehicles, and mobility. And as mobility has continued to change, as our strategic planning has evolved, we've added electrification, we've added travel technology, we've added mobility as a service. And interestingly, I think we might be the only corporate that has a strategic investment focus in customer experience. That is very important for us as a service company, that the companies that we support improve customer experience one way or the other, especially making for a more frictionless mobility experience. So at the beginning, we focused, like many corporates did, in primarily investing in A and B rounds, relatively smaller dollars. I counseled our investment committee that over time, as we developed more expertise and the investment committee and the company felt more comfortable, that we will very quickly want to go earlier. We did that, I think, after 18 months, and we like investing in seed deals. And we've also found over time that to follow a partnership that some of our operators have entered into, we probably will be making more later stage investments to help support our partnership. We very much like to follow on and support our portfolio companies. Getting back to the acting like a financial venture capital group, we really roll up our sleeves and help support our portfolio companies, not only internally at enterprise to develop partnerships, but also within generally as a business.
Yep, great, thank you for that. And I want to come back to the partnership point, but we also want to focus on, I think, what you were able to accomplish in the downturn over the last couple of years. So I want to start by just sort of setting the table there. Let's go back to 2020, right? Pandemic sits in, world is kind of all falling apart. Nobody's renting cars.
Nope.
And so what's going through the mindset of the organization, at that point? When we were preparing for this little conversation, you said you had been given a pretty intense, if I can use that word, a pretty intense directive from Chrissy Taylor. Tell us a little bit about that and how you responded to it.
I think we're blessed in that we're a privately held company. We were founded 62 years ago by Jack Taylor. He was a naval fighter pilot, and then he started our company with 7 vehicles, leasing them, and now we have a fleet of about 1.9 million vehicles. It's quite an astounding story. And his motto was, if you invest in your customers first, if you invest in your employees second, profits will follow. And so the family's quite purposeful. They're very conservative. They have always reinvested in the business. And you can really see that. An example is with the tenure of our senior leadership staff. Of the top 20 people of the company, 18 people of the company have been there for over 30 years. They started there out of college. So that's an example of investing for the long term. And Chrissy Taylor sat down with me and a few others and said, Bob, let's not take our foot off the pedal here. This will pass. even though we were renting very few vehicles, we knew that this was going to pass. And she said, go full force, not only on the M&A side, but also on the corporate side. So during the height of COVID, we performed diligence, we signed, and we closed the second largest acquisition that we've ever made, quite transformational for us. And then on the CVC side, we remained quite active. And I can't tell you how fortunate we are. And I think that has a lot to do with how we continue to educate our senior leadership on the benefits that corporate venture capital has brought, especially the C in CVC.
Yep. Okay, so let's talk about some of those successes, and particularly, and I think it might be helpful to the audience, because it sounds like maybe Enterprise is taking a little bit of a broader or perhaps more thorough approach on the partnerships that you do with your portfolio companies. Let's talk about that for a few minutes, if you would.
So before we make an investment in a portfolio company, we're very careful to say, unlike many of you, and each company has different approaches to your cultures, we're very careful to say, listen, we cannot commit to a partnership up front. However, having said that, you're in a very good position. They've met the folks internally during our diligence on the folks that they would more than likely be partnering with. We've received the support of the operating group that could be impacted by the potential portfolio company. And we work it. And a good example is one of our portfolio companies is called Booster Fuels. And for those of you in San Francisco and Southern California, Texas, Oregon, Washington, Tennessee, and the East Coast, they have purposely built mini tankers about the size of a Chevy Tahoe with about 1,400 gallons of gasoline, diesel, and most importantly, renewable fuels. And they fuel last mile delivery companies, they fuel mom and pop plumbers, anyone with a fleet, because the company has shown that if they were to take care of the fueling during the off hours, the operators can focus just on delivering their package so they can create a customer experience situation. So obviously right at the beginning, we entered into a customer relationship with them. And during COVID, we really worked hard with them. And we did three things in particular. One is for the new markets that Booster has been entering into, we were, in most cases, the landlord for them. As you can imagine, with all of our vehicles, we have a lot of parking lot space. From a regulatory perspective, we can have tankers with 1,000 gallons of fuel in the back of them on our lots. Secondly, with our fleet management company, with Booster Fuels growing so quickly, we wanted to support them from a leasing perspective to help them be as asset light as they can. And so during that time period with great expansion, we've leased to them, I'm not sure of the final count, but at least 50% of their fleet to date, and we will continue to do that. And then most importantly, we entered into a channel sales relationship with them where our fleet management folks interfaces with our customers with a fleet of anywhere from 8 vehicles to thousands of vehicles, have said, hey, do you want to increase your operational efficiency by 8% and cut down on fuel fraud and make that completely frictionless? And our fleet customers have responded greatly to that, and it's been a great boon for Booster Fuels.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Great story. So, okay, in light of Enterprise Holdings Ventures' performance, especially during the difficult time of the last 2 years, What advice would you give to your fellow CVCs? I mean, are there lessons learned from that experience?
I think it's important to, I think we heard it from the folks from Stanley that were up on stage here before, communication, communication, communication. We always have continuous interfaces with our leadership, with our operators at the company worldwide, and that's exceedingly important to do. I still don't think that we do a good enough job doing that, educating them. Some things that have helped us, I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, Justin, is we bring in outside speakers. So we bring out entrepreneurial folks that are in an emerging area of mobility that we're considering investing in, and we ask the CEO to speak to us. We ask our financial VC funds to come in and speak with us. We help educate our leadership that this is a long-term investment that needs to be long-term because there's so many corporates, and we saw this during 2008. I saw that when I was a financial VC, that turn off investing. During the great panic of COVID, I spoke with many of you, corporate VCs, also financial VCs, and just to try to test the water, to see if you all were pencils down, if you were continuing to invest. And although most of us will not admit it, many of us were pencils down during COVID. And what was great for us is we continued to invest, we continued to meet with potential portfolio companies that may not have been a strategic fit for us to invest in them, but could be good technology partners for our businesses. And I can't tell you how many relationships, vendor relationships, partnerships that have come out as a result of the corporate venture capital program. And it's communication, it's data. It's very difficult because what we do is soft. You know, how can one say explicitly how we can add value to the corporation? I listened to a panel yesterday afternoon, and it's interesting. Some of us have developed point systems where that's a kind of a grading communication feedback system. I thought that was an interesting approach. But as we're going to be entering difficult times here.
Absolutely.
And we think it's going to become pretty rough. And in our most recent investment committee, our leadership said, Bob, we're going to continue to invest. And we'll probably be making some announcements here shortly with some new investments. If you look at our strategic investment focus areas again, our main focus areas today are mobility as a service, autonomous vehicles, and electrification. As the world's fleet electrifies, there's been great transition to consumers who own electric vehicles. However, as fleets own electric vehicles, that's a much different equation because for individuals who own a home and are able to charge their vehicle at home, that's an easy thing to do. But if you're a fleet of many different vehicles that are always on the road, how the heck are you going to charge your fleet? In our case, obviously fleets will become all EV at some point, but how are we going to figure out how the infrastructure of how are we going to electrify our fleet? And we've done this, and I think this is another example of how corporate venture capital adds value. Is a former director in my group was tapped on the shoulder to start our innovation group 3.5 years ago, and one of their main focuses is on electrification. We work very closely with them, and we will continue to make electrification investments here shortly.
Yeah, excellent. Well, look, I'd love to continue the conversation, but we're out of time. So, Bob, I will say thank you and congratulations to you and Enterprise for everything you've been able to accomplish, and best of luck in the future. But appreciate your insights, and thanks so much for sharing.
Thank you, Justin.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina. Yeah. Oh, great.